Okay, we are starting the live stream. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ZeroBuild forum and its opening ceremony. As you know, the Mother Earth has been giving an environmental error for decades. Therefore, we are ready to start to correct this error by this forum throughout 5 days, about 50 sessions, and about 140 speakers from 35 countries. I am Professor Serdar, a member of the International Board of the Forum. For the sake of clarity, honestly, I should point out that at the moment, approximately 2,500 registered participants are following this opening ceremony. Welcome every single participant who is likely willing to learn, speak, and discuss about zero-energy buildings. Please note that the translation of this ceremony can be followed at the live stream too. You can see it at the right-hand side of the program page of the ceremony on our website. The duration of the opening ceremony will be about 90 minutes. Of it, 70 minutes are for speeches and presentations, and the remaining 20 minutes are for questions and answers. In the opening ceremony, as you know, we have 6 speakers. I will shortly introduce each of them just before their speeches begin. However, you can obtain their LinkedIn profiles, their biographies, their backgrounds by clicking their names in the program page of the ceremony on our website. By the way, dear our speakers, please turn off your microphones. You can activate it while starting your speech. In fact, such organizations for zero-energy buildings around the world often remain at the local level and thus offer a very limited perspective in terms of diversity. In addition, a number of organizations have highlighted either only academic or just practical views on the zero-energy buildings. In this context, our forum is the first international organization aiming to create a holistic perspective in this field thanks to its wide range of its multinational coverage and its inclusion of scientific opinions and practical views at the same time. On the other hand, the environmental and economic sensitivities represented by zero-energy buildings should be implemented not only with the efforts of governments, but also with those of non-governmental organizations such as us on awareness and knowledge transfer. In this regard, our forum fulfills its responsibility and makes an important contribution to the world, which has attracted the great attention and appreciation of the World Green Building Council, which is the top organization on energy efficient buildings, of course, together with the Passivhaus Institute in Germany. Therefore, we are now starting the forum through an opening address from Victoria Burrows. Victoria is the Advancing Net Zero Director of the World Green Building Council. Essentially, she is the graduate of Architecture and Environmental Design in the University of Nottingham, the UK. Now Victoria will introduce World Green Building Council, World GBC, and its Advancing Net Zero project. She will talk about the adverse effect of the built environment and the related future projections and commitments. Yes, Victoria, welcome to our forum. We are waiting for your opening address. Good luck.
Hello, and thank you to the ZeroBuild Forum for inviting us here today to speak to you about how World Green Building Council and our network of green building councils are working to advance net zero buildings. My name is Victoria Burrows. I am the Director of Advancing Net Zero at the World Green Building Council. World GBC is a network of around 70 national green building councils working to catalyse the uptake of sustainable buildings for everyone, everywhere. And we're transforming the building and construction sector across 3 strategic impact areas: climate action, health and well-being, and resources and circularity. And that's because the built environment has a huge impact in terms of resources consumption, currently responsible for around 39% of energy-related carbon emissions globally, and energy demand is expected to increase by 50% by 2050 with projected global population growth. So the built environment presents a massive opportunity to tackle the world's most pressing sustainability challenges. Some of the countries that have signed the Paris Agreement have committed to improving building efficiency to meet their climate change mitigation targets, but actually only 64 of those 194 countries currently have building energy codes. So we have a lot of work to do. Our theory of change is that across those three strategic impact areas of climate action, health and well-being, and resources and circularity, we've set North Star goals, and we have global and regional projects to undertaking activities across 7 impact areas to help deliver those and to implement and track our progress and change in the built environment. Advancing Net Zero is a project that was introduced by the World Green Building Council following the Paris Agreement being set in December of 2015 at COP21. It intends to accelerate the uptake of net zero carbon buildings to 100% by 2050. We're working to increase the awareness of and education of the urgency and achievability of net zero buildings, to achieve alignment and commonality between the approaches and certification schemes of different green building councils, and to expedite uptake in global markets by sharing leadership examples at forums such as the one here today. We have a whole life carbon vision that incorporates both addressing operational carbon emissions, so the emissions associated with energy consumed to power, heat, cool, and light buildings, but also the embodied carbon associated with materials and construction processes. So by 2050, we believe that new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon, and all buildings, including existing buildings, must be net zero operational carbon. We also have a 2030 date, which focuses more on new buildings to demonstrate the increased influence you have in affecting the performance of a building through good design. So new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have at least 40% less embodied carbon with significant upfront carbon reduction, and all new buildings must be net zero operational carbon from 2030. Within our framework, which is shown on screen here, we set definitions for what we mean by net zero operational carbon and net zero embodied carbon, and a series of guiding principles to ensure best practice application, which follows the general hierarchy of using a lot less and then optimizing the use and performance of what you still have remaining to meet the needs of the buildings, and then offset where necessary any remaining emissions. Around the world, our green building councils are developing different tools and programs and resources to help respond to this challenge, and to take that framework and its guiding principles and its vision and apply it in a way that's relevant to a particular market context in terms of the types of initiatives, the types of metrics and target areas, and the type of terminology that's used as well. So, for example, we have in the Netherlands this concept of Paris-proof, where organizations can ensure that their buildings are fit for purpose, for future-proofed against future climate scenarios in line with the Paris Agreement reduction targets. There's LEED Zero from the US Green Building Council, which recognizes a balance of net zero in energy and carbon from the US Green Building Council. In Singapore, where it's really difficult to achieve all your renewable energy needs on site through renewable energy such as solar panels, or from procuring off-site through lack of availability and land space, they're approaching it through a super low energy concept, which means reducing the amount of energy consumed by the building as much as possible. And then in other markets, they're also taking a whole life carbon approach, such as with the UK GBC and their net zero carbon buildings framework, ensuring that there are targets and standards in there for reducing embodied carbon. And similarly with DGNB from Germany, having a climate positive certification program, which requires buildings to set a roadmap for achieving net zero for all of the associated emissions. But all of these programs work against that framework, and therefore we're bringing in that alignment and ensuring that they have programs that encourage buildings and their sector towards net zero. So the good news is that net zero is here. We are seeing the technological applications in different building types all over the world, from net zero mosques in Jordan to entire building precincts in Sydney, which are very high density and therefore rely on off-site renewable energy as well as on-site generation, affordable housing in the bottom left-hand corner in Hawaii, and renovation of existing buildings such as the stadium in Brazil to achieve and generate far more renewable energy than is needed in that building itself, and so is able to distribute that to local buildings. So we know that the solutions are here. There's lots of different ways to achieve net zero, from on-site renewable energy and off-site renewable energy, but we can see it happening all over the world in lots of different contexts and climates. And therefore, the World Green Building Council has introduced the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, which encourages buildings to achieve net zero at scale. So looking at entire portfolios or entire cities, districts, or even states and national portfolios of buildings. And so businesses, governments, and organizations are able to commit to achieving net zero against an advanced trajectory for their own building stock, for all their new and existing buildings within a portfolio by 2030, so in advance of that 2050 date I set out earlier, or in the case of governments, to regulate for buildings to operate at net zero by 2050. We ask all signatories to also disclose and assess their annual asset and portfolio energy demand and carbon emissions data, and to act to reduce emissions by developing and implementing a decarbonisation roadmap, which outlines key actions and milestones towards both reducing energy demand and reducing carbon emissions. Verifying performance through enhanced energy performance, such as with green building certification schemes, and showing how those carbon emissions are being reduced across a portfolio on an annual basis, and reporting that at both an asset level, so building level, and portfolio level. And then finally, advocating for wider emission reductions by acting as a catalyst through core organisation activities for further action within respective supply chains. So that might mean that you're a design firm and you occupy a small number of buildings, maybe you're a tenant, and so what you can do within those buildings to achieve net zero is quite limited, but your impact through the work that you do, the projects that you work on, is significant. So what can you do in addition to addressing your own portfolio through your core organisation activities as well? We currently have 100 signatories to the commitment, with more being announced this week, and we have a detailed guidance that's available on our website for those who are interested in signing up and finding out more. Each organisation and government that signs up to the commitment creates an action plan setting out the intention to achieve the different components that I just set out. And we use the Green Building Council network, their rating tools, their guidance documents to help and support signatories in achieving their commitment goals. I've mentioned embodied carbon briefly, and I want to carry on with just a quick mention about why that's important. And I mentioned already that globally, buildings are responsible for 39% of carbon emissions, and that's broken into 28% for building operations, so the use of buildings, and 11% from the construction industry for the materials and the construction processes in creating and maintaining those buildings. Building operations are split into the residential and commercial sector, and also into direct emissions created on site through on-site combustion, for example, and indirect emissions from use of electricity from the grid. That 11% from the construction industry is actually fairly small when considered against the total amount of emissions from the concrete, steel, and aluminium sectors, which are over 22.5 emissions on their own. 22.5%, excuse me, of emissions on their own. And that's broken down into roughly 11% for concrete, 10% for steel, and 1.5% for aluminium. And therefore, if we, as the building and construction sector, an enormous procurer of these materials, can help create the demand for low carbon alternatives for these products, then we can have a much greater impact on global carbon emissions than just the 39% that our sector is already responsible for. And therefore, we will be introducing a whole life carbon commitment pathway to the commitment as I've set out later this year. This week, we're celebrating World Green Building Week with its theme, Act on Climate, through advancing net zero buildings. And we're highlighting the action that's being taken already by businesses and governments around the world in advancing net zero buildings, and why net zero buildings are important for communities, for the planet, and for economies. It is time to tackle the climate crisis, to rise to the challenge, to overcome the hurdles for a more resilient tomorrow, and net zero buildings are the solution. So this World Green Building Week, learn how we can take action across our sector, share the message about net zero buildings and the materials that you can find on our website, and lead on climate action. Show how you as an organisation or yourselves are advancing the sector towards a net zero future. Our web address is just here for World Green Building Week, and we still have some time for you to get involved this week. Going into a bit more detail around the campaign, net zero buildings for communities. Net zero buildings support a healthier and more sustainable built environment, creating thriving and resilient communities. And when it comes to creating those communities, urgent action is long overdue. For the planet, buildings account for more than 1/3 of global carbon emissions. Net zero buildings dramatically reduce energy demand and use renewable energy sources. It's vital we prioritise net zero buildings today to protect our planet and future generations. And finally, for economies, investing in new and existing net zero buildings today can stimulate innovation, activate supply chains, and create jobs. This will unveil a new economic reality that leads to a cleaner, brighter, and more resilient tomorrow. So we invite you to join us this World Green Building Week to share your leadership action, your work towards net zero, your actions to help support the wider community and industry to drive the uptake of net zero buildings, because we really don't have any other choice. Thank you very much for your time today. Please get in touch if you'd like more information, and best of luck for a fantastic conference. Thank you.
Therefore, we will now start with Mrs. Seda Müftüoğlu Güleç. Now, we will listen an opening speech from Mrs. Seda Müftüoğlu Güleç, both a member of the organization committee of the forum and as the president of the board of Zero Energy and Passive House Association of Turkey. In fact, Mrs. Güleç has worked very hard, especially for a couple of months. We all thank Mrs. Güleç for her dedicated nature indeed. Honestly, the Passive House side of the forum would be missing without her great efforts. As another important point, she is the coordinator of the first and single Passive House, certified Passive House project in Turkey. Now Mrs. Güleç will talk about the works of organization committee and will draw a general perspective from her association's point of view. Yes, Mrs. Güleç, welcome. Our participants are waiting for your speech.
Thank you very much. Kıymetli katılımcılar, sıfır enerji binalara gönül vermiş değerli dinleyiciler. ZeroBuild 2020 kapsamında düzenlenen foruma hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Bugün burada bu işin mutfağında çalışan tüm gönüllülere özellikle teşekkür etmek isterim. Tüm oturumları titizlikle hazırlayan forum sekreteryasına, kurullara, organizasyon komitesine ve teknik altyapıyı oluşturan herkesin ellerine sağlık. İyi ki varsınız, bugün bizi burada buluşturdunuz. Her şey bir hayalle başlar. Biz mimarlar çok kullanırız bu cümleyi. Bundan 10 sene önce hayal olarak görülen ama aslında imkansız olmadığını anlatmaya çalıştığımız konu ne mutlu ki 5 gün boyunca bu forumda tüm yönleriyle irdelenecek. Kentleşmelerdeki hızlı nüfus artışı, sanayileşmeyle birlikte doğal hayattaki hızlı tahribat bugün kendisini iyice göstermeye başlamıştır. Yaşanan doğal afetler, nesli tükenen canlılar, önünü alamadığımız değişen mutasyonlar ve salgınlar, hepsinin altyapısı elbette değişen iklim koşullarıdır. Ve tam da forumun temasına uygun dünyamız artık hata vermeye başlamıştır. Hepimiz farkındayız değil mi? Ve bunun önüne geçmeliyiz. Aslında her bireyin alacağı önlemlerle iklim değişikliğinin etkilerini azaltmak mümkün. Ancak bu forumda konusunda uzman 136 konuşmacı bu önlemler binalar ölçeğinde nasıl alınır onları tartışacak. Eminim ki birçok uzmandan çok verimli bilgilerle bu 5 günü tamamlayacağız. Konu başlığımız binalar olunca iklim değişikliğinin önüne geçilmesi adına bu sorumluluğun tek bir disipline indirgenmesi mümkün değildir. Mimar, inşaat mühendisi, makine mühendisi, elektrik mühendisi, peyzaj mimarı, yani bir yapının enerji tasarruflu olması ancak tüm disiplinlerin ortak çalışmasıyla mümkündür. Sıfır enerji yapılara ulaşmanın ise en kolay yolu elbette enerji tasarrufu yüksek yapılar yapmaktan geçer. Yüksek enerji verimliliği sağlayan yapılara yenilenebilir enerji kaynaklarını entegre ederek sıfır enerji yapılara ulaşmak aslında hiç de hayal değildir. Bu bağlamda özellikle vurgulamak isterim ki dünya tarafından kabul görmüş yapılarda enerji tasarrufuna odaklanan en önemli yapı sistemi pasif bina sistemidir. Sıfır Enerji Pasif Ev Derneği olarak forumun 3. gününde pasif binalar konusunda tüm merak edilen hususları, dünyanın önde gelen yerli ve yabancı uzmanları ve proje örneklerini sizlerle buluşturacağız. Sıfır enerji binalara ulaşmak için iklim değişikliğinin en kötü etkilerinden kaçınılmasına yardımcı olacak ve ülke ekonomisinde de tabii ki katkı sağlayacaktır. Uzmanlar bu hedeflere iş dünyası, devlet, STK'lar ve sivil inisiyatiflerin koordineli çalışmasıyla aşılabileceğine inanıyor. 2020 zor bir yıl oldu insanlık için. Covid-19 virüsü hala aramızda ve uzun yıllarda bizim de olabilir. İşte bu noktada artık durup içinde hayat sürdüğümüz yapı binalarımızı daha çok sorgulamamız gerekiyor. Sadece iklim değişikliğiyle mücadele ya da enerji verimliliği için değil, aynı zamanda sağlıklı yapılara ulaşmak için de pasif ev standardının ne kadar gerekli olduğunu anlatmak istiyoruz. İstiyoruz ki dünyanın birçok ülkesinde olduğu gibi Türkiye'de de pasif ev yapıları daha iyi anlaşılsın ve daha fazla vakit kaybetmeden yapı standardı olarak kabul edilsin. Vaktimiz sandığımızdan daha az olabilir. Enerji verimi ve sağlıklı yarınlara ulaşmak hem çocuklarımıza hem de gelecekteki torunlarımıza bırakacağımız en güzel mirastır. Konuşmalarımı tamamlarken dünyanın geleceğini nasıl değiştirebiliriz, daha sağlıklı yarınlar yaratmak için neler yapabiliriz'i her oturumda dikkatlice irdelememiz gerektiğini bir kez daha hatırlatmak isterim. Saygılarımla.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Güleç, for your very nice presentation. Thank you. Now, Mr. Orhan Turan will give an opening speech both in the name of the advisory board of the forum and as the president of the board of Turkish Enterprise and Business Confederation. This presentation will be concerning the energy efficiency and the energy efficiency in buildings as well as its importance. Yes, Mr. Turan, welcome. We all are waiting for your address.
Teşekkürler hocam. Değerli dostlar, değerli katılımcılar, ulusal ve uluslararası alanda yetkin ve etkin isimleri dinleyeceğimiz 5 günlük fikir turunu başlıyoruz. 35 ülkeden 136 konuşmacımız ile 48 oturumda bir arada olacağız. Öncelikle Türk Konfet Yönetim Kurulu adına hepinizi saygı ve sevgiyle selamlıyorum. ZeroBuild Danışma Kurulu üyesi olarak da Uluslararası Binalarda Enerji Verimliliğinin Sanal Forumu'na hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Emeği geçen tüm arkadaşlarımı kutlarım. Sürdürülebilir bir hayat için enerjide dönüşüme katkı sağlamak, enerji verimliliğine yönelik toplumsal farkındalık yaratmak ve her alanda bu dönüşümü başlatmak zorundayız. Türk Konfet olarak bu vizyonu ortaya koyan ZeroBuild 2020'yi desteklemekten büyük bir memnuniyet duyuyoruz. Bilgi, sevgi ve tecrübenin paylaştıkça çoğaldığına inanan biri olarak binalarda enerji verimliliği sanal forumunun bu paylaşımı arttıracağı gönülden inanıyorum. Verimlilik, enerji verimliliği ve sanayi ile binalarda enerji verimliliği konuları 40 yıllık iş hayatım ve 30 yılı aşkın sivil toplum kuruluşu deneyimimde hep özel ilgi alanım olmuştur. Yalıtım sektöründe faaliyet gösteriyorum ve iş hayatımda da ayrılmaz bir parçası enerji verimliliği. bağımsız ve gönüllülük esasıyla bir araya gelen, ülkenin sorunlarını dert edinip çözüm üretmek isteyen iş insanları tarafından kurulan Türkonfet'in yönetim kurulu başkanlığını yapıyorum. Ve Türkonfet'in odak alanları olan sürdürülebilir kalkınma ve küresel rekabetçilikte yeni normalimizin kodlarından birinin de enerji verimli olduğunu düşünüyoruz. Türkonfet bugün 26 bölgesel, 4 sektörel, 30 federasyon, 267 dernek ve 40 bini aşkın işletmeyi aynı çatı altında bir araya getiriyor. Bu derneklerinden övünerek söyleyebilirim ki 42'si kadın derneği. Kadın temsiliyetinin en yüksek olduğu sivil toplum örgütü de Türkonfet'tir. Kendi kaynağını toplumsal fayda için geliştirdiği projeleriyle yaratan Türkonfet, ulusal ve uluslararası paydaşlarıyla da değer yaratma misyonu ile soruna değil çözüm odaklanırken, sorunun değil çözümün parçası olan bu etkinlik gibi işbirliklerini de önemsiyoruz. Değerli dostlar, değerli izleyiciler, sınırlı kaynağa sahip olan dünyamızda nüfus artışı bir yandan yaşam alanlarına olan ihtiyacı, diğer yandan da enerji olan talebi arttırıyor. Doğal ve çevresel kaynakların sürdürülebilirliği her zamankinden daha önemli bir hale gelirken, daha akıllı, daha temiz ve daha verimli enerji teknolojileriyle yenilebilir enerji kaynakları insanoğlunun ortak sorumluluğu artık. Birleşmiş Milletler Sürdürülebilir Kalkınma Amaçları, sürdürülebilir şehir ve yaşam alanları ile erişilebilir ve temiz enerji başlıklı odaklarıyla neler yapılması gerektiğini ortaya koyuyor. Türkonfet, TÜSİAD ve UNDP işbirliğiyle kurduğumuz Hedefler için İş Dünyası platformu ile işte bu 17 hedef doğrultusunda özel sektörün daha fazla sorumluluk alması için çalışıyoruz. Küresel sorunların kapsayıcı küresel işbirlikleriyle çözüleceğine inanıyoruz. Sürdürülebilir yaşam ve enerjiye, toplumsal refaha giden yolda önemli bir amaç olarak yaklaşıyor. Kentlerimizi güvenli, erişilebilir ve enerji verimli yaşam alanlarıyla donatmak, güneş, rüzgar, termal gibi yenilenebilir enerji kaynaklarına yatırım yapmak, daha akıllı ve daha verimli bir sanayi planlamak, en önemlisi de çevresel değer yaratacak teknolojik çözümler uygulamak önceliğimiz olmalıdır. Değerli dostlar, afet ve felaketler bir yandan kaos yaratırken, diğer yandan değişim ve dönüşümü de tetikler. Covid-19 pandemisi hayatın her alanında teknolojik dönüşümü hızlandırırken aynı zamanda daha sürdürülebilir hayatı amaçlayan değişimin de kapısını açmaktadır. Döngüsel ekonomi, sıfır karbon salınımı, AB Yeşil Anlaşması, daha sağlıklı bir hayat ve şirketlerin daha yenilikçi olması için yaşam, çalışma, üretim ve tüketim alışkanlıklarımızı nasıl dönüştürdüğümüzü gösteriyor. Ülkeler arası dış ticaretin kodlarını da değiştirecek bu süreçte küresel emisyonların %1.2'sini oluşturan Türkiye'nin enerjide verimlilik temelli politikalar devreye alması önem kazanıyor. Sürdürülebilir kalkınma, kaliteli büyüme ve toplumsal refah. Tüm yollarımız verimliliğe çıkıyor. Enerji verimliliği hayatın, çevrenin ve doğanın sürdürülebilirliğinin de anahtarıdır. Daha yaşanabilir bir dünya için enerji verimliliği bir lüks değil, aksine zorunluluktur. Ülkemiz son 15 yılda OECD ülkeler arasında artan enerji talebiyle dünyanın önemli ekonomilerinden biri haline gelirken, ekonomimizin de yumuşak karnı cari açıkta artış sorunu yaşamaktadır. Bildiğiniz gibi son 10 yılda ortalama yılda 45 milyar dolarlık bir enerji ithalatı yapan ülkemiz, son 5 yılda yaklaşık 220 milyar dolarlık cari açığın 213 milyar dolarını enerjiden vermiştir. Ülkemizin enerjide verimliliğe yatırım yapması, sanayisinde verimli teknolojileri kullanması ve döngüsel bir üretim ekonomisinin benimsemesi, kısacası karbonsuz bir hayat için yaşanan dönüşümün tetikçisi, takipçisi değil, aktör olması gerekiyor. Ülkemizin sera gaz emisyonlarının %72'si enerjiden, %13'ü ise endüstriyel üretimden geliyor. Sadece sera gazının emisyonlarının 2050'ye kadar azaltılması ile tasarruf miktarı yaklaşık 20 milyar doları bulacak olan ülkemizin sanayi ile konutlarda enerji verimli bir dönüm başlatması yaratacağı ekonomik ve toplumsal değeri de artıracaktır. Enerji verimliliğini arttırmak aynı zamanda ekonomik ve toplumsal pek çok sorunun da çözümünü katalizör olacaktır. Ülkemizin sürdürülebilir kalkınması, kaliteli büyümesi ve toplumsal refah artışı için topyekün bir enerji verimliliği seferberliğine de ihtiyacımız var. Değerli dostlar, değerli katılımcılar, dünyamızı daha yaşanabilir kılmak hepimizin ortak sorumluluğu. bu sorumluluğun bir parçası olduğunu düşündüğümüz ZeroBuild 2020'nin dalga dalga yayılan enerji verimliliği farkındalığı yaratmasını temenni ediyorum. Danışma kurulunda birlikte çalıştığımız dostlara şükranlarımı sunarken konuşmacılarımıza ve katılımcılara da teşekkür ederim. Sağlıklı ve sevgiyle kalın diyorum. Teşekkür ederim hocam.
We thank you, Mr. Turan. Thanks a lot for giving a strategy drawing speech. Now, Mr. Vlasios Oikonomou will make an opening speech as the Managing Director of the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy. His speech will be regarding energy efficiency policies, laws, evolutions, and how Turkey can benefit from the EU lessons learned and international experience. Carlos Vlasios.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me, and congratulations for this very nice and interesting conference.
We are very delighted to see you in this forum, and I would like to thank you again for accepting to be a member of the International Board of the Forum. It's an honor for us.
You're welcome. My privilege. Okay, thank you. So I will try to summarize in the next 10 minutes, more or less, what has happened in the EU, some key lessons that we can learn, and for sure they are beneficial for Turkey, especially for the design of the policies in the new period for the next up to 2030. So as our previous speakers rightly said, next we have all these targets set from the Paris Agreement in the EU. You are all aware of the Green Deal that was launched almost a year now, and recently, some days ago, the European Commission proposed to have a higher target to reduce CO2 emissions from 2030 from 40 to 55% as of reference to 1990. And of course, this you can imagine is a very big boost for the economy, and it has a lot of repercussions on what has to happen to achieve this goal. Now, also in 2018, the European Union had the one directive on energy efficiency, which has been running for many years. And in 2018, it was amended. So here, this directive actually sets the policy framework of energy efficiency to 2030 and beyond. And the key element was a target for energy efficiency target, let's say, or for 2030 of at least 32.5%. Now, part of this target now is to be accomplished with a specific article in the directive. It's a difficult one called the Article 7. And what it does, it's actually this article sets the mandatory requirement for annual energy savings, final energy savings, of 0.8% for 2021-2030. So with this article and this mandatory target, all member states, all countries, let's say, must present clear policy to achieve these savings. And this is a difficult article because, as I said, it's a mandatory, and in essence, it sets that the EU energy consumption should be no more than about 1,300 million tons of oil equivalent of primary energy, or something like 960, something like that, million tons of oil equivalent of final energy in the future. Now, from what we've seen so far is that based on, as we're doing also some work, a lot of work for the European Commission and also for the DGs and also for the Horizon 2020 program, we are running a lot of Horizon 2020 programs. And based on the assessments we've done is that from 2014 to 2017, 2018 now, from the energy savings that member states have achieved, also including the built environment, of course, which is a major player there, and the buildings that this conference is being addressed to, and the respective policymakers. So if we take what has happened, it's very unlikely that most member states will meet their national targets. Very few member states are close by to that, but as I said, the majority of member states will not reach these targets, and it's quite difficult, and this creates a big sign, and a clear sign that more things have to be done. If we take also the lockdown period, that we had the residential electricity demand increased, the residential, as I said, in most economies, because people spend more time at home and all this stuff. Even if we take into account in the last week of March and first week of April, the residential demand was about 40% higher across certain European economies than in some weeks in 2019, several other weeks in 2019. This is quite important. Of course, the increase of residential demand were far outweighed by all the reduction in the commercial and industrial operations. So we had, in total, we had, of course, a reduction of the energy demand. What this means that maybe with the reduction of the primary energy consumption, so about 5 to 10%, some countries could reach the 2020 targets. But with existing measures that they are being implemented, it's impossible to reach the targets of 2030. And this really means a lot of work to be done. what we also have seen is that in the entire EU, we had a stability in the primary consumption, with of course a 22% average GDP rise. So we had reductions of energy intensity in the final consumption. And also we had an increase in the energy efficiency by about 1.2% annually, which creates some extra savings, about $14 million of oil equivalent. And this would mean that if we take all this from 1990, that energy efficiency is the first fuel in primary energy. It's almost 4% higher contribution than the oil. And the majority, of course, of that is being attributed to buildings. Now, what we have seen in terms of policies being implemented. Most of the policies were energy efficiency obligation schemes, and these schemes that are being discussed, I know that also in Turkey there was some discussion some time ago on that. Just to give a brief idea, it's a scheme policy measure that obliges distributors or suppliers of energy to carry out energy savings in their final customers. If they don't do it, they have to pay a penalty in a simple line. Of course, they also have the right to buy out part of this obligation. The target is set on each supplier or distributor on the grounds of the market shares, or at the sectoral level, or also in terms of sales. Also, in some cases, we have certificate markets, which is kind of a tradable commodity, and this creates some added value. And there, if we take all the countries, but from Europe, let's say almost 16 to 17 countries have used or are trying to establish an energy efficiency obligation scheme. Next, of course, to other policies, also mainly addressed to the buildings, which are of financial nature, regulations, information campaigns, while several countries are using taxes on oil and energy to close the gap of the savings they cannot achieve. The important thing of this directive, and why it could be interesting for Turkey, is that it sets two criteria. The one is additionality and the other is materiality. Additionality, what does it mean? Is that all savings that take place due to the target set must be additional, in a way new, to the savings that would take place due to regulations that exist. You also have building regulations, you also have building codes, energy regulations. So whatever savings that should be eligible, let's say, should be additional to that. And this creates an extra stimulus in the market. And the other criteria of materiality is the way that you have to prove that the savings did take place. And this has to do also with the quality of savings. So, for instance, you cannot just put low-level insulation and claim savings. It has to be done that there are some quality criteria that the savings have taken place. And then, of course, it's also important to highlight that the majority of these policy instruments used in Europe are in direct relationship with the Energy Performance Building Directive, so the directive that sets the building standards and the energy efficiency standards for the buildings. And this criterion of additionality that I mentioned, so this additional of savings, somehow safeguards that the renovation part will take place and also leads us towards the net zero energy building. Also, if we take into account, just to give you a brief idea, that if we took the business as usual scenario in the EU, the investments that took place or that are taking place or are due to take place in the period 2021-2030, based on what member states have said, in terms of billion euros, if we take the buildings and the residential sector only, it would be around 125 billion. If we have the targets being implemented, the energy efficiency targets and also the renewable energy targets, the investments can be doubled, 250. And by 250 billion, we speak of it's the highest type of investment that take place, even in comparison to expansion of power grids or power plants, which are no more than 50 billion euros. So you can see that the buildings and the residential sector can really give the big stimulus that we need. Another issue, and is that the member states had declared the national energy climate plans for the 2021-2030 period, where they had to explain what types of measures they will implement to achieve the savings. The problem with these things is that the average GDP growth rate that was being used in all these scenarios was about 2%, and now we do have a real contraction of about 5 to 10% due to the COVID, and also we have the new targets. So all these figures should be revisited. Just to give you two more lines, and I'll end my intervention, is that we have an important element is that we have energy poverty in Europe, and I guess also to some extent also in Turkey. There are some big numbers. And the policies that are being used are either social type of policies, so meaning subsidizing somehow the consumption in a way, or energy efficiency policies on the other hand. So energy efficiency obligations are one of the key policies that can be used to tackle energy poverty. And why energy poverty is important, of course, is that we have about 82.3 million energy poor households in Europe, just to give you a big number what it is about. And why it's important? Because it's directly linked also to health issues and to COVID due to the respiratory issues. Damp homes with mold are associated about 30 to 50% increase in the respiratory problems, and this has a higher rate of COVID deaths in this household. Then the last part I want to mention is that we have also another very important principle, which is, I think, is very highly relevant for Turkey, and you should try to adopt it. It's the energy efficiency first principle. And the energy efficiency first principle is a fundamental principle, and it means to consider the potential value of investing in energy efficiency, including energy savings, demand response, net zero energy buildings. So we have to take this potential value in all decisions about the energy system development, which means that if energy efficiency improvements in the households, in the residential sector, in the buildings, are shown to be more cost effective or valuable in terms of the social value also, so this taking the social cost benefit analysis. So if these things are more cost effective, they should be prioritized over any other investment in power generation, grids, pipelines, fuel supplies. You can imagine the importance of this part for the buildings and what, of course, this conference is being related. So I would say that, as we said, energy efficiency in the buildings is the first and the cheapest fuel, and that's where we should invest. It's a political decision. From what we have seen from Turkey so far, and all my work I've been doing in Turkey over the last years from the Dutch government and everything, we know that there is a great commitment between the policy officers in Turkey and the Ministry of Energy for energy efficiency, and we're pretty sure that adopting the correct policies and you have the right skills, and if you adopt the correct policies, also the obligation schemes and other related policies, you can definitely achieve your targets. Thank you very much for the time.
Thanks so much, Vlasios, for drawing a policy-oriented direction. Indeed, I think it will be very beneficial both for international audience and for Turkish listeners. Thank you again very much. Now, Associate Professor İdil Ayçam will speak on behalf of the Designers Board of the Forum, and also since she is an academician in the Department of Architecture in Gazi University, Turkey, she will indicate the architectural point of view on the main issues of energy efficient buildings. Welcome, Professor. It's your turn.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Değerli katılımcılar, ZeroBuild 2020 forumu kapsamında düzenlenen etkinliğe hoş geldiniz. Emeği geçen tüm ekiplere yürekten teşekkür ediyorum. Burada Tasarımcılar Kurulu adına bulunmaktayım. Sürdürülebilirliğin yaşamın her alanında ana hedef olarak ele alınması giderek elzem hale gelmiştir. Bugünün kaynaklarını koruyarak gelecek nesillere aktarabilmek, nüfusun ve taleplerin giderek arttığı, kaynakların azalıp dengelerin sürekli değiştiği günümüzde hayati öneme sahiptir. Bu nedenle bir bütünün parçası olarak var olan ve var kalan, kaynaklarını doğru ve verimli kullanabilen, değişen ve dönüşen bir dünya düzeni kurgulanmaktadır. Buna adapte olabilen, uyumlanan, gerekli değişimi toplumun farklı kesimlerine aktarabilen uluslar gelecekte var kalacaktır. 5 gün sürecek bu etkinlik kapsamında farklı disiplinlerden konunun uzmanları, sıfır enerjili binaları, tasarım, yapım, uygulama, kullanım, finansal yönetim ve organizasyon, yasal mevzuatlar, yurt dışı ile uyumlanma süreci, maliyet etkinliği gibi farklı açılardan ele alacaklar. Günümüzde inşaat sektörü, dünya enerji tüketimi ve karbondioksit emisyonlarından sorumlu en büyük sektör olup enerjinin %36'sı, emisyonların %39'undan sorumludur. Projeksiyonlarda bu değerlerin 2040 yılına kadar yaklaşık %42 oranında artacağı öngörülmektedir. Sektörde enerji tüketimini azaltan, doğru tasarlanmış, pasif ve akıllı sistemler ile enerji performansının iyileştirilmesini hedefleyen entegre bir tasarım sisteminin bu amaçla kurgulanması gereklidir. Sıfır enerjili bina tasarımı ile doğru tasarlanmış bir binada enerji tüketiminin en aza indirgenmesi mümkündür. Tasarım ilkelerinin doğru uygulanması, sıfır enerjili binalarda verim alınabilmesinde büyük önem taşımaktadır. Yanlış tasarlanmış bir binada sonradan alınacak tedbirlerin etkisi sınırlı, maliyeti fazla olacaktır. Bu nedenle tasarım sürecinin yeniden kurgulanması gerekmektedir. Ortak hedefe yönelik farklı disiplinlerin bir arada çalışabildiği, bütüncül bakış açısıyla ele alınmalıdır bu süreç. Bu bir süreç yönetimini ve optimizasyonu gerektirmektedir. Gelecekte konuya yönelik farklı disiplinlerin eğitim sistemlerini yeniden değerlendirmesi ve revize etmesi gereklidir. Sıfır enerjili binalar daha az enerji tükettikleri ve hızlı ekonomik kalkınmanın neden olduğu enerji kıtlığını azaltabildikleri için günümüzde dünya çapında ilgi görmektedir. Bu kavram 1970'lerden günümüze kadar gelişerek, değişerek, dönüşerek gelmiştir. Sıfır enerji, yaklaşık sıfır, net sıfır, pozitif enerjili bina gibi farklı tanımlar, tipler mevcuttur. Net sıfır enerjili binalar, enerji ihtiyacı dengesinin yenilenebilir teknolojilerle sağlanabileceği şekilde tasarlanan, minimum enerji tüketen binalardır. Sıfır enerjili bina konseptinin özünde, çevresel koşulları iyi analiz eden, gerekli pasif ve aktif tekniklerle donatılmış, minimum enerji tüketirken enerjisini yerel olarak sağlayabilen, kirletmeyen, yenilenebilir kaynaklara öncelik veren, maliyet açısından optimizasyonu dikkate alan bina tasarımı yer almaktadır. Bu kapsamda özellikle uyumlanma sürecinde yakın temas halinde olduğumuz Avrupa Birliği ülkelerinde 2000'li yıllardan günümüze pek çok yükümlülük, mevzuat ve uygulama bulunmakta, konuya yönelik direktifler yenilenerek uygulanmaktadır. Avrupa Birliği'nin enerji hedeflerini sistematik bir şekilde takip etmek için 2020, 2030 ve 2050 hedefleri detaylı incelenmelidir. Bu hedefler Avrupa Birliği'nde sera gazı emisyonları, yenilenebilir kaynaklar ve enerji verimliliği ile ilgili istikrarlı bir politika çerçevesi sağlamaktadır. Bu bağlamda Türkiye'deki mevzuatın yenilenmesi ve uyumlanmasına yönelik süreç devam etmektedir. Konuya yönelik yetkililer sunumlarında detaylı bilgileri bizlerle paylaşacaklar. Tüm bu açıdan forumun bundan sonraki süreçte gerçekleştirilecek çalışmalara ışık tutmasını ve verimli olmasını diliyorum. Sağlıkla kalın. Saygılarımla.
Thank you, Professor Ayçam, for your very nice speech indeed.
Thank you.
And finally, we will listen to the first keynote speech of the forum. It will be given by Professor Ariel Gustafsson. He is a member of the International Honorary Board of the Forum. He works as the Director of Research Center on Zero Emission Neighborhoods in Smart Cities and as a professor in the building physics at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. In fact, honestly, there is no doubt that Ariel is one of the greatest academic figures in the field of zero-emission buildings in the world when looking at his H-index and the number of citations he has received so far. The title of his keynote is From Zero-Emission Buildings to Green Neighborhoods, Possibilities and Challenges. As I know, to the best of my knowledge, Ariel has made an alteration by putting the neighborhood concept instead of the building concept in the zero-emission building term. It may seem as if a small change, but I think it indicates a serious transformation from a general and comprehensive viewpoint. Welcome, Ariel.
Hello, thank you for this kind presentation.
I thank you one more time personally, honestly, as you accepted to be in the honorary board of the forum and to give a keynote speech. We are very delighted indeed.
Okay, thank you again. So do you see my presentation?
Okay, you can start.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So the title of my presentation is Zero Emission Buildings and Green Neighborhoods, Opportunities and Challenges. And as you said, I'm a professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology and also leading the research center on zero emission neighborhoods in smart cities. The contents of my presentation is first I will give a bit of the background, which partly has already been introduced. I will talk a bit about the work we have been doing on zero-emission buildings and give a couple of examples, and then touch upon green neighborhood concepts and give some examples on those, and then end with some thoughts on challenges and opportunities. So why do we work on zero-emission buildings and zero-emission neighborhoods? And as presented earlier, we know that the buildings and the building construction sectors combined are responsible for 36% of the global final energy consumption and nearly 40% of the total direct and indirect CO2 emissions. The emission numbers vary a bit from source to source, but I think if you include upstream energy and material production, I think it can be a quite substantial number anyway. Yeah, and we know the current numbers, but looking at the future, the energy use and the related emissions may double or potentially even triple by mid-century. And this is due to increased access to adequate housing and related facilities for people in developing countries, due to population growth, migration to cities, household size changes, and increasing levels of wealth and lifestyles. So improving the energy performance of the building stock and developing zero-emission building concepts and zero-emission neighborhood concepts are very important to avoid an increase in the energy use and the greenhouse gas emissions. And this, of course, also relates a lot to the UN sustainability goals, and I think several of those are relevant in this regard. For instance, affordable and clean energy for all. When you aim for zero energy concept and zero emission concept, we know that we need to invest in renewable energy production, and usually close to the building or on the building site or on the building itself. We touch upon sustainable cities and communities. A lot of the buildings we have are in cities, and there will also be an increase in the number of people living in cities. And we need to increase the number of built houses in a sustainable way. And of course, climate action, this connection is very clear. And also partnerships for the goals. Making one building includes partnerships across different disciplines, but making a zero-emission neighborhoods or a sustainable city, you touch upon very many areas like municipalities, consultants, the building sector, the energy sectors. You need collaboration for all these actors to make sure we arrive at this wanted environmental ambition. Looking a bit what is going on in Norway, we see that today's average for energy use in buildings is around 200 kilowatt hours per square meter each year. In the technical regulation in 2010 aimed for below 150 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And in 2017, we introduced it says passive house level, but it's almost passive house, close to 100 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And we know in 2020, which is now coming to an end, soon we will have the nearly zero energy ambition level pointed by the European European Commission. And maybe in 2025, we might end up with a zero energy ambition level. But so far, most of these requirements, at least in Norway, have been on the energy use and usually only on the operational energy use. If you look at the energy use going into making the materials, the picture might be a bit different. But still, at least in Norway, it remains to be seen what exactly these definitions will be, also for this year, actually. And then, since we also think that the embodied emissions, the energy use, and the emissions going into making the materials and constructing the building is just as important, we have been working on the zero-emission building concept. And the main concept of a zero-emission building is that renewable energy sources produced or transformed at the building site have to be compensated for CO2 emissions from operation of the building and for production, transport, and demolition of all the building materials and components during the life cycle. So we need renewable energy production to compensate for all the emissions. And that then means emissions related to, let's see if I can show it. Okay, so we look at emissions related to the materials, to the construction, to the use phase, and also connected to the demolition phase. And for energy efficient buildings with renewable energy production integrated, like PV, we often see that the material emissions are of the same magnitude as the operational emissions. Or also material energy use is on the same magnitude as the energy used for operation. So looking at the whole life cycle then becomes really important to make sure we also work on the material side, the construction side, in addition to the operational side. So we have developed different ambition levels. This is showing one of those. And we have different ambition levels depending on how much renewable energy production we can have on the building. So what is shown here is the zero emission building in operation. Here we have renewable energy production of the same size as, or the same magnitude as we have or we need for operation of the building. And if we are able to include more renewable energy production on the building or on the building side, we can have more ambitious requirement for the building. And then, so the ultimate aim is to have renewable energy production compensating for all the emissions related to the whole life cycle, and then also taking into maintenance of the building. So if you use this zero emission building definition, we will have a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We will have energy efficient buildings. We will have new local renewable energy production on the buildings or nearby the buildings. We will have reduction of material and energy use, and also promote the use of environmental friendly materials and the reuse of materials and solutions, and also optimization of energy flows. So this can also be displayed in another way with the different ambition levels shown here. So we have zero emission building in operation when we have renewable energy production compensating for the operational phase of the building. We have zero emission buildings with operation and materials, and then have renewable energy production compensating for both the operation and the material production and maintenance, and so on. SEB-COM is zero emission buildings with construction, operation, and materials. And SEB-COME is zero emission buildings with construction, operation, materials, and end of life. And the easiest level or the lowest level is what we call zero emission building in operation, but then without the plug loads or the user equipment. And this way of defining zero emission buildings also help the construction industry at improving the energy requirements or the environmental requirements when they learn more from how to plan a building like a zero emission building. And this is not only theory, it's also applied in real demonstration projects. So right now we have been working with the industry and developed 8 projects, 8 of the 9 shown here. So it's office buildings, it is residential buildings, it's also school buildings. I will give 2 examples. The first one being the zero emission building house in Larvik, that's south of Oslo in Norway. So it's a demonstration building. It's the architect was Snøhetta, and the owners are a company dealing with technical systems for buildings. And if you look at the ambition level here, it is zero emission buildings, including operation and materials. And to obtain this ambition level, they have used a lot of wood. They have reused materials, for instance, in this case, the bricks. I will get back to that. And in addition, they have combined different systems that are heat pump, photovoltaics, and solar collectors. For instance, the architect and the owner wanted to have thermal mass in the building. And the first concept was with regular concrete, adding that to the core of the building, but then calculating and trying to aim for the zero emission building operation and material emission level, they found that this contributed too much to the emissions, or the material emissions. So then they looked at low carbon concrete as an alternative, but in the end, they end up using reused brick that was sourced from a barn nearby that was being taken down anyway. And in this way, focusing on emissions during the whole life cycle of the building, they managed to reduce the emissions to the environment. And looking at the photograph, we see it's a lot of PV, photovoltaics on the roof. In addition, there are also solar thermal panels on part of the roof. At the end, we can look at the energy numbers. If this building was built according to the technical regulation in 2017, it would have used slightly above 100 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And by using the zero emission building ambition, we see that they end up with the operational energy less than 50 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. And also we look at the renewable energy production. And if you compare this to both operation and the materials, we see that it is larger than the energy used for operation and for the materials. And this needs to be like this because we have to compensate during the lifetime of the building. And in the calculation procedure, we define the lifetime of the building, or the life cycle time, as 60 years. And another building, this was a renovation project of an office building from 1980. It originally had an aluminum facade with a lot of glass. And after renovation, they ended up having more wood in the facade and burnt wood to take down the emissions or take down the embodied emissions further. And all in all, they here aimed for what they call zero emission building with operation and materials, with taking out the user equipment. So here they used exposed concrete as thermal mass to limit the temperature fluctuations. They reused glass and concrete from the original building. And if you look at this figure, you see that the glass walls, internal glass walls, the glass is coming from the facade of the building. And also used, as I said, wood in the facade and also hybrid ventilation system. And they have a lot of photovoltaics on the roof, both on the roof of the building itself, but also on the part of the parking garage that belongs to the building. In this way, they're able to produce enough renewable energy to compensate for operation of the building and also for taking into account the materials. That was two examples. Then I will show two slides showing what the result can be if we implement zero emission buildings in the technical regulations and look at scenarios towards the future. This graph shows the built square meter floor area in the Norwegian building stock, starting at 2020 and looking into the future to 2050. And we see that there will be an increase in the built area the next 30 years. And if you look at what this will do to the building stock, some of these buildings will be unchanged because they are new or built quite recently. Some will be upgraded, and some will be new buildings built according to the technical regulation at the different future times. And then we can calculate the energy performance of the whole building stock into the future. And we did that by looking at three scenarios. On baseline scenarios, using the current energy performance requirement and improving them slightly. We also looked at a SEPEV scenario where we implemented some of these zero emission building concepts into the future energy requirements, and also looked at a really ambitious scenario. And if we see at the results, we can see that energy use in the Norwegian building stock can be almost 40 terawatt hours less in 2050 compared to 2020. And the SEPEV definition itself that we have proposed can contribute with 31 of those 39. There is a big energy efficiency potential and also a potential for implementing renewable energy technologies in the building stock. And this can, even with an increasing population and increasing built floor area, we can have a reduction, and a substantial reduction. And this freed up energy can be used in other sectors like the transport sector, if we are electrifying the transport sector, moving from fossil fuel to electricity. Or it can also be used in other areas. And then I changed to the neighborhood scale. I think I have 2 or 3 minutes left. So recently, in 2017, we started to work on the neighborhood scale. And that is because we see that working on one individual building might not be optimal. It's better to look at a group of buildings and to look at synergies. Today, we usually cool one building while we can heat the neighboring building. So the best thing would be to use the surplus of heat in the building where you need this heat, of course. And so I'll just show briefly 3 examples of how this can be defined. And one is coming out from the Zero Emission Neighborhoods Center, where we have developed this research center definition. And then instead of having a zero emission building ambition, building for building, we have an ambition of having a zero emission neighborhood. And we still look at the direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions throughout the life cycle of the building. We then aim to have zero life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. The neighborhood should become energy efficient and powered by a high share of new renewable energy. The neighborhood energy supply system. We need to manage the energy flows and also exchange energy with the surrounding system in a smart and flexible way. We should promote sustainable transport patterns and smart mobility systems. Further, we should plan and design and operate with respect to economic sustainability. And we should locate amenities in the neighborhood to provide good spatial qualities and stimulate sustainable behavior. We need to have the users of this, or the citizens of these neighborhoods with us, of course. And we should also look at innovative processes as part of this. So we're now testing out this definition in several areas in Norway, and working with municipalities and property developers. I also have 2 other examples, and one is connecting to an E project. And here the main mission is to increase the share of sustainable neighborhoods with surplus renewable energy. And so here the focus is on energy, but instead of looking at the individual building, also here look at the neighborhood scale. And then you can have neighborhood storage systems or neighborhood energy supply units, and you can have exchange of energy and control of energy use among the buildings. And the export of energy then needs to be larger than the import to obtain the ambition level. And also this project is working towards real demonstration cases, one in Norway, one in the Netherlands, one in Spain, and one in Austria. And also, finally, one example is coming from the strategic energy technology plan, and one of the topics covered there is smart cities and communities. And the aim is to support planning and deployment and replication of 100 positive energy districts by 2025. And also, if you look at the details here, the definition touches upon several of the same topics as we saw for the Zero Emission Neighborhood Research Center. So mobility, energy, renewable energy, smart controls, and also should support social, economic, and environmental sustainability. I think I almost used my time. Final slides. But there are, of course, several challenges when realizing green neighborhoods. We are working with different parties in the neighborhood. For instance, owners, developers, and these people or these actors will have different environmental ambitions. So this is a challenge. And also there are not systems in place for sharing energy sources, electricity. You can easily share as long as the policy measures are in place, but thermal energy is not that easy if it's not there from before. There are also a lot of regulatory barriers in place, and we see that even in Norway for exchange of energy between end users. There are also technical and legal standardization is needed to make this happen. And also the tools, for instance, calculating the greenhouse gas emissions is not easy. The tools for this is not easily available at the moment. We start to get a lot of data for buildings, but infrastructure and energy systems, it's still lacking to a certain extent. But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities. We can optimize the energy use and renewable energy productions among different buildings and also towards energy system. And the focusing on the neighborhood instead of the individual buildings, make sure emissions related to infrastructure, like grids, technologies for water, sewage, waste, and mobility, and is also considered. So it's not only the building then, but you take into account also infrastructure connecting the buildings. Installation of new renewable energy technologies can be easier than limiting it only to the building itself. And working with a neighborhood, we also get easier access to a group of people, the people living in the neighborhood. And finally, addressing the neighborhood scale instead of individual can make it possible to speed up the decarbonization of the building stock, and that is really needed. But as I said, there are also some challenges, so we need to work on those to overcome and manage the transition to a more sustainable built environment. That was the last slide, so thank you.
Buildings. As this is the opening ceremony, unfortunately we will not take any question for speeches. However, you can directly ask your questions to our speakers in other sessions, of course. We especially thank all speakers of this opening ceremony. They all have determined and drawn the outline of the forum indeed. Now at 11 o'clock, there's an international session of which speakers are from France, Greece, and Kosovo. Have a productive and thought-provoking sessions and speeches. See you in other sessions. Bye.